everybody. We have something really special in store for you in this video. In this video, Noah's going to be demonstrating the first appearances of the stories and pieces in Stephen King's Behemoth 1993 collection, Nightmares and Dreamscapes. So like previous collections, the first appearances run the gamut from anthologies, which were collected in hardcover, sometimes in special limited signed editions, to just incredibly obscure local and regional magazines published in Maine. And a few of the pieces are original to Nightmares and Dreamscapes, so those are not covered. And a couple of the pieces, Dolan's Cadillac and My Pretty Pony, are covered in separate videos because of their standalone signed and limited releases, and those videos are incorporated into this video. So if you've already seen those, you can just skip over those parts. But yeah, anyway, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Noah to dive in to these stories in this epic collection.
Hey everybody, so today we're going to take a look at the Stephen King novella Dolan's Cadillac, which was first published in the Stephen King official newsletter Castle Rock over 5 installments. The first installment was published in issue 2 of the newsletter in February of 1985. So the first issue was January. This was a monthly newsletter. And the first, I believe, 4 or 5 issues were a stapled, just very sort of amateur looking, almost looks like a high school newsletter you would get. This is issue 2, and this contains part 1 of 5 of Castle Rock. Issue 3, which, by the way, is the issue in which Stephen King, the news comes out that he's Richard Bachman. This has part 2 of Dolan's Cadillac. The April 1985 issue has part 3 of the story. And this is the last issue in which the newsletter appears in this sort of cheaply put together format. Issue 5 of the newsletter is the first one that appears like a actual newspaper. So this is the May 85 issue and contains part 4 of the story. And it's even got, it makes the bottom of the front page there. And the final, part 5 of 5, appears in the June 1985 issue. And it's right there on the cover, Dolan's Cadillac, part 5 of 5. So this is where the story first appeared, first piece of original fiction by Stephen King in Castle Rock. Issues 2 through 6, February through June of 1985. So that's the first appearance of the novella. The second story is The End of the Whole Mess. The End of the Whole Mess originally appeared in Omni magazine. This is the October 1986 issue of Omni. And The End of the Whole Mess, let's see. Here we go. Gets a 2-page spread with some interesting artwork. And so this was Omni. Omni is a science, look at that. Cigarette smoking is cool. Makes you look like a cowboy. Omni is like a science fiction magazine. And this issue is interesting looking at it now because there's so many cool 80s advertisements in it that I'm not showing you. But yeah, look at that. Pretty interesting stuff. But yeah, lots of deodorant and cigarette ads and The End of the Whole Mess. Look. Yeah. I was a teenager when I was a high school kid when this came out. And did not read it at the time. But I probably didn't read the story until at least a couple years later. But anyway, that's the end of the whole mess. Okay, next up we have Suffer the Little Children. This story first appeared in the February 1972 issue of Cavalier. So we're back to these men's magazines. So I guess by the time King was compiling his third short story collection in 1992, he went back and looked at some of these early stories that hadn't yet been collected and felt they were good enough to appear in collections. So Suffer the Little Children first appeared in this issue of Cavalier, and let's take a peek at it. Okay, it has a full page illustration here, and there you can see the title, and that is Suffer the Little Children. Not much else to say about this, but there you have it, 1972 Cavalier, and this woman must be quite cold out there in the snow, but at least her feet are warm. Okay, so next up we have the Night Flyer. The Night Flyer was a novella that first appeared in the landmark anthology Prime Evil. Prime Evil is a book, it came out in 1988. I was a high school senior and I did purchase this book new upon release. It was being reviewed everywhere. It was like, even then, an amazing anthology. I read it upon release and loved it. This is the actual copy that I purchased at the bookstore at the time, and not the copy I read, but the copy for my shelf. I've had it since then. This anthology is just, to this day, an amazing anthology. So not only Stephen King's new one, The Night Flyer, but we have Clive Barker and an amazing story by David Morrell. To this, the best short story I've read by him, and I don't think I've read it since, but I remember it vividly. Orange is for anguish, blue is for insanity. And if you haven't read that one yet, get it. It's fantastic. You also have Charles Grant. You have Peter Straub, Whitley Strieber, Ramsey Campbell. It's like an all-star. Dennis Etchison. All kinds of great stuff. An interesting thing about this is that the book is divided up into little sort of subcategories, and the category that contains the King story is called In the Court of the Crimson King. Years before the Crimson King was a character in the Dark Tower, but pretty cool. And the Night Flyer first appeared, let's see, let me show you the night. There it is. So here we have the Night Flyer in Prime Evil. This is the U.S. First edition of the book. If you want to look and see if your copy is a first printing, you're looking at an $18.95 price on the jacket. And on the copyright page, a printing line that goes all the way down to 1 over there. Okay, so that's the U.S. first edition of the book. It was then published in the UK as a trade hardcover edition. Slightly better jacket artwork, I think. The price on this one is $11.95 UK. And the copyright page does not have any indication of printing. Nope. However, it was published also in 1988, the same year as the US first edition. So that's the British first of Primeval, published by Bantam Press over there in the UK. It was then released as a signed limited edition, both in the US and the UK, and was a co-publication with Donald Grant doing the US version. So they both look, as you'll see in a second, they both look the same. They come in a black tray case with nice red, kind of red velvet lining. The book, okay, so this is the Donald Grant US version. The book is bound in black leather. It's got illustrated end papers, and a nice full color frontispiece. And let's find the limitation page. So in the US, there were 1,000 copies done, each one individually numbered and signed by all of the contributors, including Stephen King. So this was the US version. It does have interior full color tip sheets, such as that. And did I say one of 1,000? Yeah, there's 1,000 copies of that. Simultaneously, in the UK, it was published by Bantam, who had done the trade edition over there, but Bantam together with Donald Grant. So it was a co-publication. The book looks exactly the same. I believe Grant actually designed the book and put it together, and Bantam actually released it over in the UK, but it's the same exact book. Only difference being you have the Bantam colophon on the spine in the UK version, whereas it says Donald Grant on the US version. Also, you have gold foil stamping on the cover and spine of the UK, and that is, I believe, just black embossed on the US version. The other difference is that the US version had 1,000 copies done. The UK version had only 250 copies done. So it's the same, it's almost the same tip sheet signed by everyone. However, only 250 copies in the UK, whereas the US had 1,000. So the UK version is 4 times as rare. And that is Primeval, containing the first appearance of the novella, The Night Flyer. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the first appearance of the story Popsy. This was first published in 1987 in the anthology Masques 2. And this was published in 2 states. First, the trade state. This, which has got a silver foil covered, bound in silver foil covered boards with the title on the front. And it was published without a jacket. And the King story, let's see, appears on page 13. So there's Popsy. First appearance of Popsy. Masques 2 was an anthology published by J.N. Williamson, Jerry Williamson, and it did have a lot of really good stories in it. I'm just refreshing my memory here. It had Robert Bloch in it. It had Richard Christian Matheson, Joe Lansdale, James Herbert, a lot of good stuff. I haven't read this since the 80s, but anyway, this is the trade state of the book. It was also published at the same time as a signed limited edition. This one was bound in foil gold foil covered boards, and came in a black cardboard slipcase. So different from the silver. This one's gold, and the limitation is just like a little piece stuck onto the front free end paper. It was 300 copies and signed by Jerry Williamson. That's it. So this was not signed by King or any of the other contributors, and didn't even warrant a full-sized tip sheet for signatures. But it's the same book inside. The only difference here is the color of the foil on the front and the fact that it came with a slipcase. So you have the 300 copy signed limited and the silver colored trade edition of Masques 2 featuring Popsy. Okay, so here's something you don't see every day. This is the first appearance of It Grows on You. It Grows on You was published in a University of Maine literary magazine called Marshroots in 1973. Here it is. This little magazine came out in the fall of 73. It was 50 cents upon publication and is probably the rarest, if not one of the absolute rarest, Stephen King items. I would have said Maine Magazine or even the Maine Review from 75 were a little rarer than Marshroots. I got my Marshroots before I found my Maine Review or my Maine Magazine. That has One for the Road on it, but I've been told by none other than Bob Jackson that Marshroots is even more obscure than those guys, and he would know. So this may well be the most difficult Stephen King short story, to find, with the possible exception of the high school era stuff. But even then, I think this might be the even including that stuff, this might be the hardest, the most difficult item to find. I'm not sure how many were printed. It must not have been many. It was a college literary magazine. It was probably, most of these were probably thrown out. But, excuse me, but I think this is, without a doubt, the most, if not one of the top 2 or 3 hardest Stephen King items to find as a collector. So if you're a collector of original short story appearances, this one is probably on your top of your want list, unless you're Bob Jackson and you have it already. Anyway, the King story, It Grows on You, appears here for the first time. And, what's interesting here too is the about the contributor section in the back, which I'll read to you. It says Stephen King's novel Carrie is scheduled for an April publication by Doubleday, which is interesting. But anyway, so this was, one of the last pre-Carrie short stories. So It Grows on You was rewritten fairly dramatically for its inclusion in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. The version of the story that appears in this is not the same as the one that appears in the collection, and the one that appears in the collection was rewritten to make it a Castle Rock story and more. I believe King described it as a sort of summing up in part of Needful Things. So much different from its 1973 incarnation. So anyway, here's a rare look at the original appearance of It Grows on You in the fall 1973 issue of Marshroots. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the first appearance of Chattery Teeth, Dudemar, in the fall 1992 issue of Cemetery Dance magazine. So this issue features Chattery Teeth. Here it is. Chattery Teeth. Let's see. I don't really have much more to say about this other than it's got probably the most memorable nickname ever that I've been saying for the past 30 years since I first read the story, because it's just so funny. But other than that, Chattery Teeth, Cemetery Dance, and there you have it, 1992. It's a short video, guys. Not much else to say about this one. Okay, so this one I have a little more to say about. Now we're going to take a look at Night Visions 5. So Night Visions was an anthology series that went through more than one publisher, but the original books were published by Dark Harvest in the 80s. Night Visions 5, so the way the anthology worked was it would each anthology would feature usually 3 writers, and each writer would submit a certain amount of short fiction, usually 3 novellas, or 3 novelettes, or a novella and a couple of short stories, or just in some cases one very, very long novella or short novel. So in Night Visions 5, Stephen King was featured, and he submitted 3 novellas, Sneakers, Dedication, and The Reploids. So the book was published in 2 states. The first was the signed limited edition. Like all of Dark Harvest's limited editions, it came in a sort of plain cardboard slipcase. Interestingly, there was no lettered edition of Night Visions 5. There was no lettered edition of any of the Night Visions anthologies up until number 10, to my knowledge. 10 did have a lettered, but by then it wasn't Dark Harvest doing it anymore. Dark Harvest did release lettered editions, but they were housed in these beautiful wooden slipcases that they called slip crates. But anyway, this is the signed limited edition. It was numbered. It was one of, it was a 800 copy, 850 print run, 850 copy print run. The trade and the limited both came with the same jacket, and let's take a look. So here we have the signature sheet, one of 850. What's really cool about this to me is that it also has short fiction by Dan Simmons, of whom I am a huge fan. So if you don't have this, pick it up, because it's got some really great stuff by Simmons as well as King. And then here in the table of contents, you can see Stephen King's contributions, The Reploids, Sneakers, and Dedication. And of those 3, Sneakers and Dedication appear in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. So this is the signed limited edition of the book. It was simultaneously published as a trade edition, and I will put this away later because I just can't do it. Here's the trade edition of the book, and it's got the same jacket. It's basically identical to the signed limited in every way except it's not signed or limited. And finally, the book was published in the UK as a trade hardcover edition by Victor Gollancz as under the title Dark Visions. Different title, same contents. And this book, it's got a cool little eye motif there on the cover. If you want to check to see if your copy is a first, it's got a printed price of $11.95 UK on the inside jacket flap. And the copyright page does not have a statement of printing. This was released in 1989, so the year after the Dark Harvest edition of Night Visions 5. So I guess many of the Night Visions volumes were not published in the UK. That's why Dark Visions, and that's why it was published as a standalone. And that's the British first edition, first trade edition. There was no British limited edition of the book. So there you have Dark Visions / Night Visions 5. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the first appearance of the story, The Moving Finger. The Moving Finger first appeared in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction in December 1990. This story has a personal connection to me, which I'll talk about in a second, but let's take a peek. Here it is, The Moving Finger. And the issue also has an excerpt from the Dark Tower 3 called The Bear, as well as an interview with Stephen King. And interestingly, this issue of Fantasy and Science Fiction was released in 2 states. The trade state, which is here, and you can tell the difference because it's got a typical kind of flimsy magazine cover and a barcode. It was also done in a 500 copy limited edition, which is this. And it's got a much thicker paper stock wrapper and no barcode, right? So it was a 500 copy signed limited edition. The interior is exactly the same. The color is a little bit different, as you can see here. It's the limited one is a little more greenish than the other one. But the interesting thing about The Moving Finger is it was done as an episode of the TV show Monsters, and I worked on that show. So the episode was shot in August of 1990, before the story was ever published. So I was one of the first people that ever got to read that story, although not in prose form, but as a teleplay. I still have my original copy of the teleplay, and I worked with the special effects crew on that show. And afterward, I kept a number of finger props, including the 9-foot-long finger that slithers across the floor, and I also had a hand that comes up out of the toilet and chokes the policewoman at the end of the episode, as well as I think 1 or 2 other props from that show. So that's my personal moving finger story. But anyway, the story was then, so really the first people that got to read that were the cast and crew of the TV show. And then it was published in this for the first time as a prose story. So that's The Moving Finger, December 1990, fantasy and science fiction. Okay, next up, we have They Got a Hell of a Band, a short story that first appeared in the anthology Shock Rock. Shock Rock was published as a mass market paperback original. It was edited by Jeff Gelb in 1988, I believe. Nope, I'm so wrong. 1992. And it was a rock and roll themed horror short story anthology. The book did actually spawn a sequel called Shock Rock 2, which I have. There's no Stephen King in that one, but I believe it contains a Rex Miller short story, which is why I have it, because I collect Rex Miller. But anyway, this first volume contains the first appearance of You Know They Got a Hell of a Band, which is the first story in the anthology. There it is. And you can check your copy to see if it's a first printing, because like all pocketbooks, it has a printing line that goes down to 1 if your copy is a first printing. So that is Shock Rock. This is the only appearance of the anthology. No book club edition, no hardcover. It was just a paperback, mass market paperback, and it came out in '92. And that is the first appearance of this story. You Know They Got a Hell of a Band. Okay, so now we're going to look at the first appearance of the story Home Delivery, which was first published in the anthology The Book of the Dead, which was published in 1989 by Mark V. Zeising. So here's the book. This is the trade edition. It's a really good anthology. It also had original stories by Robert McCammon, Richard Lehman, Ramsey Campbell, some really good stuff. Joe Lansdale had a story. But Stephen King's contribution was Home Delivery. So let's take a peek. You can check and see if your copy is a first printing. It'll have a $22 price on the jacket. Let's see. And no statement of printing on the copyright page. Anyway, let's take a look at the King contribution. Page 33, here it is. Home Delivery, first time anywhere. At the same time that this was published, the book was also released as a signed limited edition, which is this. It came in an illustrated slipcase, cardboard slipcase. The book looks just like the trade edition, same dust jacket. Everything's the same, except for the binding. And of course, the limitation page. This was done in 500 copies and was signed by everyone, including Stephen King at the bottom there. So they just all kind of signed these tip sheets. There was no spaces for each name, etc. But anyway, the numbered version is the only version of the limited, and that is where Home Delivery first showed up. Book of the Dead, 1989, edited by Skip Inspector, by the way. Okay, next up we have Rainy Season, which first appeared in the magazine Midnight Graffiti. This is the spring 1989 issue, which is also the Stephen King issue. It's got him on the cover reading a novel version of Rainy Season, which of course doesn't exist. But this is also a cool issue because it features original fiction by Rex Miller, who, if you haven't read him, check him out because he's awesome. It's got interviews with King. This has a lot of different things going on. But let's take a peek at Rainy Season. There it is. Rainy Season, first appearance. It's got some awesome Clive Barker artwork on the back from the Books of Blood. Pretty cool. Anyway, Midnight Graffiti, 1989, first appearance of Rainy Season. There you have it. Hey everyone, so we are going to be looking today at My Pretty Pony by Stephen King, which is a novella that was published in 1988 by the Whitney Museum in collaboration with Alfred A. Knopf Publishers. And the book was released in 2 states, a trade state of, I believe, 15,000 copies, and a signed limited edition. Unfortunately, my trade copy, which is the copy I got when the book was released or shortly thereafter, is still shrink wrapped. I left the shrink wrap on. I'm not a fan of shrink wrap, but because there's no dust jacket, in this case, I made an exception to the rule and I left the book shrink wrapped just to protect the delicate cardboard edges as it's slid into and out of the shelf. So unfortunately, I cannot open the book and show you the inside. However, it's basically the same as the limited, signed limited edition, which I'm going to show you in a minute. So I regrettably can only show you the outside of the book, which is pretty hideously ugly. If no one else has said it, it is a precursor to Insomnia, a red and white, just eyesore of a book that has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. I think this, if I saw this on the shelf, I would walk away fast. It looks like a Dr. Seuss book. It just has big white letters on a red field. The spine, you know, I mean, there's nothing about this that is interesting or in any way visually appealing to me. So I will say that. Probably, maybe even worse than Insomnia. I don't know. At least Insomnia says Stephen King in big letters, but this is an ugly bastard. But anyway, and it's big. It's a big, ugly bastard. Here's the size of a regular book, and here's My Pretty Pony. So you can see the difference. It's a tall one. But anyway, that's the regular trade edition of My Pretty Pony. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the signed limited edition of My Pretty Pony, which is the largest book in my entire book collection, which consists of not only Stephen King, but dozens of other writers and probably close to 20,000 volumes. This is the biggest and the heaviest book. This book weighs about 20 pounds and it feels to me like 40. It is a beast. And here it is. Look at this thing. It's the size of my torso. Look. From my neck to my hips is the size of this book. So this was published by the Whitney Museum. And what an idea. I can't believe, nobody said no when they thought of this, but it comes in a really nice oversized tray case with the title of the book, no author, just the title of the book stamped on. And I believe the tray case was only issued with some copies. Not every copy came with one, so I'm lucky I got one of the tray cases. I have to put it down to take the book out because it's just too heavy to manipulate. So the book is bound in steel. And it actually features, so it's got a red leather spine, and it has a clock on the front cover. And my clock, it's a digital clock. My clock worked probably for 15 years after I bought this book. It was, every time I opened the book, which was not often, the clock was still ticking. And it died, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something like that. And you have to unscrew this plate to change the battery, and I just couldn't be bothered because it's in the tray case. No one ever sees it. So The clock was working, sadly no more. So why is there a clock? Because the story is about time, for those of you that have read it. And the story, the novella, was collected in, I believe, Dreamscapes, in 1993. So everyone has, can read it. If you haven't read it, it's available to read. Anyway, the book is, look how large the print is. It's like the largest print ever. It comes with all these lithographs that are protected by this protective material. And it's just, it's hard to show you because of that, but look at the edges, look at the text block, so cool. Anyway, let's take a peek at the signature page. Barbara Kruger is the artist, and the book is signed by both King and she. Let's see. It's been so long. I think it's a couple pages in from the back, but let me double check here. No, maybe it's in the front of the book. It's in the front of the book. I should have looked at this before I started the video. Should not have I. Nope, now I can't find the signature page. Nope. Well, all right. Let's see. I'm going to have to put this book down and look for the signature page while you guys sit there and wait for me. I'm sorry. Let's see. What else can I tell you about this book? It's heavy. Did I say how heavy it is? It's heavy as balls, and it is really... Oh, there we go. Okay, so here it is. There's King's signature and Kruger underneath. Published by the Whitney Museum of Art. 250 copies were done. Not individually numbered, so no idea what this number this is. They're just unnumbered. 250 copies, and then 1 through 30 Roman numeral copies that were author copies. So those Roman numeral ones went to King and Kruger, were never for sale. So that is the biggest Stephen King book that there is, and the heaviest one. And that is the limited My Pretty Pony, bound in steel. The book was published at $2,200, in case you're wondering. It's a $2,200 book, which is about what I paid for it. I didn't get it at the time of release. I got it probably, it was 89. I probably got my copy sometime in the mid-90s, so maybe 5, 6, 7 years after it was released. And it was still, this did not go up in value. I think I still paid issue price in the mid-90s. This did not go up in value for a long time. Very recently did it go up in value. Because nobody wanted it. It was like a weird, huge book, and people weren't excited about having such a giant book, and it was a novella. I don't know. I don't know why it didn't sell more, or it didn't go up as a collectible more, but that's the weirdness of Stephen King collecting, I suppose. Anyway, there it is, and I'm gonna now go hike it back downstairs. Thanks for checking it out. Okay, so next up is Crouch End. This story first appeared in September 1980 in an anthology entitled New Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos, or Cthulhu, however the hell you pronounce the word. Depends on how much of a H.P. Lovecraft nerd you are, I suppose. But I'm going to say Cthulhu because that's the way I say it. But anyway, New Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos by Ramsey Campbell, editor. This is the first edition of the anthology. Get a good look at the spine if you can without reflection. And Crouch End. Crouch End is the first story. Let's take a peek. here we have it. This is 1980, so very much older story. This one could have been collected into Skeleton Crew if he had chosen to do that. You can check to see if your copy is a first printing, because the price on the flap will be $11.95. And my copy has a review slip laid in there, and the copyright page will not have any indication of printing. So that is Crouch End in the first edition of New Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos, edited by Ramsey Campbell, and published by Arkham House, by the way. Okay, so next up is the story of the Fifth Quarter. The Fifth Quarter is an interesting one. It originally appeared in the April 1972 issue of Cavalier. So Nightmares and Dreamscapes only had 2 stories from Cavalier magazine. Stuff for the Little Children and the Fifth Quarter. So this is the April 1972 issue, and the Fifth Quarter is an interesting story because it is the only piece of fiction that King has ever written that was published under a pseudonym other than Richard Bachman. And the pseudonym that was used for this story is John Swithin. Let's take a peek. So John Swithin was a one and done. It appeared only here and never again. So here is the Fifth Quarter by John Swithin. And the reason for the pseudonym, I believe, is that it's a crime story. It's not horror. It's not what King was known for even back in these days, pre-Carrie. It's just a straight up crime story. And he wrote a number of these crime stories. Another one was called A Man with the Belly, that appeared later in end of 1978 in Cavalier. But this was, I guess, the first one. I'm trying to think. I guess this was the first one, and I don't know whether King himself or the publisher of Cavalier felt that it would do better under a pseudonym. But anyway, The Fifth Quarter by John Swithin in April 1972 Cavalier magazine. Okay, so next up is the Doctor's Case, which first appeared in the anthology The New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And I can pronounce Sherlock Holmes. So this is the first edition of the book. It was a trade hardcover. It was published by Carroll and Graff in 1990, I believe. Nope, 1987. I was way off. 1987. So we have the Doctor's Case. Let's take a peek. I believe the story, let's see, page 303. Oop. There we go. So this is the first appearance of this story. I got a little illustration there. And if you want to check to see if your copy is a first printing, there'll be a price on the jacket of $18.95. And the copyright page, I do not believe, has an indication of printing. It does not. So if yours does, it is later than a first. And that is the Doctor's Case, which is a sort of a Sherlock Holmes pastiche, and in which Watson steps up and solves the case. So there you have it. Okay, so finally in this collection, King included 2 pieces of baseball-themed nonfiction. And the first of them is a piece called Head Down, which originally appeared in the April 1990 issue of the New Yorker magazine. under the title Sporting Scene with a subheading of Head Down. Here's the issue. I don't normally collect short nonfiction. I don't recall buying this. I don't know why I have this. It is not something that I normally would get, but I do have it. So anyway, April 16th, 1990 issue. And here is I almost said story, not really a story. It's a bit of nonfiction. So essay would be probably a better descriptive, but the Sporting Scene, Head Down. And I don't have much to say about it because honestly, I barely remember it. In fact, I don't remember it at all. I don't like baseball, and I'm not a huge fan of nonfiction. I could barely read Faithful. I kind of skimmed it, actually, to be honest with you. And this was something I did not read in this magazine, but I read it in the collection Nightmares and Dreamscapes, and I have no memory of it. I probably hated it, but there you have it. Head Down in the New Yorker. Okay, and finally, you have the nonfiction piece Brooklyn August, published in this digest called I.O. This is issue 10 of I.O., the baseball issue. And again, I don't know why I have it. I guess I was collecting like early King poetry, and this is just typically not something I would be into, but for some reason I do have it. So anyway, here is a peek at Brooklyn August as it first appeared in this digest, I.O. I don't know what I.O. means. Like, it's a University of Maine magazine. And this is, let's see, is there a date on this one? Don't see a date. I want to say this was 1970, but there is just no date here that I can see. I don't know. Does anyone know when this came out? Like 70, 71? It's early 70s for sure, but there's just no date. No date anywhere. Whatever. Anyway, here is I.O. With Brooklyn August, and that completes the stories that appear in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. Thanks for checking it out.